I was up here a couple of months ago and we looked at the story of David and Mephibosheth. And that was a lovely story. I love that story, feel-good story. And we're going to look at another story today, hello Gracie, from the life of David. But this story is a tragedy. It's the story of Absalom. And it actually spans like 6 or 7 chapters. So just give me a bit of time to try and condense that and get enough of the story loaded in our minds so we can discuss it. Just going to jump in. The story starts with actually Absalom's half-brother Amnon and Absalom's sister Tamar. And Tamar was very beautiful, and Amnon became infatuated with her and he desired her, and he came up with a plan with one of his friends, and he's like, I'm going to pretend to be sick. I'm going to ask Tamar, can she come over to my house and cook a meal and serve it to me? And that seemed like a reasonable request. So Tamar went over, cooked a meal at his house, went to his bedroom to serve it. But when she went in, Amnon overpowered her, took advantage of her, violated her. Then he hated her and chucked her out. And when David and Absalom heard of what Amnon had done to Tamar, they were furious, both of them. But they had very different responses. One, David didn't do anything. He was just angry. He probably should have done something. Absalom, on the other hand, he was furious, but he just kept it hidden. Didn't want Amnon to know how furious he was, because Amnon was holding this vengeance in his heart that he wanted to get back at Amnon. And he was very patient, and he waited and he waited. And 2 years down the track, when maybe Amnon has sort of like thought, oh, maybe Absalom's not mad at me, he finds his opportunity, and his sheep had just been shorn up in the country somewhere, and he's like, oh, I'll hold a feast. I'll hold a feast for the shearing of the sheep, and I'll get all the brothers and we'll go up and we'll have a feast. And so Absalom organises this feast, and all the brothers go, Amnon included. And while they're feasting, Absalom gets 2 of his servants to kill Amnon. And immediately the brothers just run back to Jerusalem, or ride back to Jerusalem. They're scared of what Absalom's doing. But Absalom himself now, he's a murderer, so he flees as well. He can't hang around. He goes to one of the neighbouring kingdoms, and he's basically a fugitive, an exile in this neighbouring kingdom. So David, he mourns the death of Amnon, but he pines for Absalom, because Absalom's still alive, but he just can't have Absalom with him because of what Absalom had done. And he pines for 3 years, and Joab, David's right-hand man, he gets sick of this. He's like, David, stop pining. And he actually comes up with a very clever idea, and he manages to convince David to just bring Absalom back. And so David brings Absalom back to Jerusalem, but Absalom's not allowed to be part of palace life. He's nothing to do with he actually has nothing to do with David, in fact. He just has to stay away from the palace. And that's fine for a few years, but after a while, Absalom's like, no, I want to be part of palace life. So he sends a message to Joab. Joab, can you come and have a chat? I want to be part of palace life. And Joab ignores him. So Absalom sends another message. Joab, let's have a chat. And Joab again ignores him. So this time, Absalom just burns down Joab's barley field. And that gets Joab's attention. And Joab actually goes and advocates for Absalom to the king, probably just to make sure Absalom doesn't do anything else crazy. And so David fully forgives Absalom, brings him into palace life. Immediately, Absalom starts strutting around like a peacock. He's a handsome man, probably, it was said he was the most handsome man in the kingdom. He's got long flowing hair that he only cuts once a year. And he gets on his chariot and he rides around the city, and he's got 50 men that he's hired to run before him as he goes around the city. And he starts acting like politicians when it's an election cycle. And he's shaking hands and he's kissing babies, so to speak, doing all that. He goes to the city gate because people are coming in and out of Jerusalem, a lot of them coming because they have a case that they want a judge to hear and sort out their dispute. And maybe David, we see that he's maybe a little bit reluctant to judge and give judgment. So Absalom's at the gate and he's talking to people, and he's like, well, you've got a really good case, and if only I were a judge in Israel, I would judge wisely, and I would hear your case. And he's doing this for like 4 years, and he's just planting this idea in the minds of the people, wouldn't Absalom make it a great king? And so after 4 years, Absalom figures he's got the numbers. So he asks his dad, well, what he says to his father, says, when I was in exile, I made a vow to God. I said, if ever I were to come back home, I would go and make sacrifices to him. Now, I think he was lying. You'll see why. But David says, oh yeah, that's good. Go honour your vow to God. And so Absalom goes to Hebron, but he doesn't go to Hebron to make sacrifices. He goes to Hebron and he calls all of the people that were for him, come meet me at Hebron. So, a whole army of men come to Hebron, and there they crown Absalom as their king. And then this army of men with Absalom march back towards Jerusalem. Now, when David hears that the people have crowned Absalom king and that there's this big army coming back to Jerusalem, he runs because he's no fool. He doesn't have the manpower to defend the city. He's got his 50 mighty men. He's got some great soldiers, some great generals, but he just doesn't have the manpower. This is not the place to have the battle. So he runs. But he does leave behind 10 of his women to look after the palace. He leaves behind a bit of a spy network to get information back to him. And he leaves behind a double agent to pretend to work for Absalom, but to really work for him. But yes, other than that, David's gone. And so Absalom gets to just walk in or ride into Jerusalem through the gates victorious. He's usurped his father. And just to add insult to injury and to further sort of desecrate the memory of his father, he actually takes those 10 women and he violates them in full public view of everyone. Now, David's double agent that he left back in Jerusalem actually does manage to convince Absalom, just stay in the city just for a little bit longer, get some, you got some more people coming to you, then once you've got everyone, then go and pursue your father. And this little delay gave David just enough time to go out, find a safe city, and gather an army himself. But his army is not near the size of Absalom's army. So there is going to be a battle, and Absalom is going to have the advantage in terms of numbers. Meanwhile, obviously, the spy network is feeding all this information back to David as what's going on in Jerusalem. So David and his generals know all about what was happening there. Now, when the battle arrives, when it's about to take place, David's generals, they say to him, David, you can't take part in this battle. You are the one person Absalom wants dead, so you are the one person that can't come. And David's like, yeah, there's some logic in that. I'll stay behind. But before the army goes out to battle, he tells his generals, he tells the whole army, please be gentle with my son Absalom. And so the battle begins. Well, first of all, the generals say to themselves, Absalom's got superior numbers, we've got superior fighters. We don't want to fight them in the open plain because numbers are the advantage in that kind of battle. What we're going to do is we're going to make our stand in a forest. And in a forest, the numbers advantage decimates. It just doesn't exist. Superior fighting men, that's where you get the advantage. So they make their stand in a forest. Absalom's army comes and meets them in the forest, and it's true. The superior fighters get the upper hand, and it wasn't long before Absalom's army is fleeing. Every man to his own house, it says. And Absalom flees as well, obviously. He gets on his horse and he's riding along, but he's in a forest, so he's ducking and weaving, and he's got his long hair. Many of you know this story, that he hasn't cut for a year. And his horse goes under an old oak tree, and his hair gets caught in the tree, and he gets stuck in the tree. The horse keeps going, and Absalom's just there hanging by his hair in a tree. And David's men from David's army come and find him there, and they're like, that's Absalom hanging in a tree, isn't it? Yeah? Well, what do we do? I don't know, get Joab. So they go find Joab, one of the generals, and they say to Joab, Absalom's over here hanging in a tree by his hair. And Joab says, well, did you kill him? Like, no. David said, be gentle. But Joab just ignores that. He just goes up to Absalom and pierces him 3 times with javelins and gets his bodyguards to beat him to death. And so ends the battle, and so ends Absalom's life. And so messengers are sent back to David. 2 messengers go. First one gets to David, and he says, my lord, the battle is won. And David immediately says, well, what about Absalom? What about my son? And the messenger goes, there was a commotion, not really sure what happened. Which is a lie. He knew exactly what happened. He just didn't want to be the bearer of bad news. But the second messenger comes and he says the same thing. My lord, the battle is won. And David again immediately asks, what about my son? What about Absalom? And he tells the truth. He says, may all your enemies be like your son Absalom. And at the news of Absalom's death, David just weeps and weeps. And he cries out, Absalom, Absalom, my son Absalom. If only I could have taken your place. If only I could have died in your place. And that is the tragic story of Absalom. So why do I tell such a tragic story? Well, there are things we can learn. At a certain level, we can just look at the people in the story and go, well, don't be like David. Don't shirk your responsibility and fail to judge. He should have done something with Amnon, and that would have been tough as a father, but it would have probably prevented a lot of what happened. You can look at Absalom and just say, don't do anything Absalom did. Don't harbour hatred in your heart. That's going to fester and you're going to destroy yourself. You're going to destroy others around you. When Absalom lied, we could look at that and go, well, if you're lying to people that you love, you've crossed a line probably some time ago. Turn around, go back. That's difficult, turning around and going back, right? But it's worse if you just keep ploughing on ahead. So there's lots of that sort of stuff that we can look at and gain some knowledge and some good information from. But what I really want to drill down into is Joab. I want us to look at Joab and his reaction to Absalom hanging there on the tree. So he had, as far as I can tell, he had to make a choice. Was he going to be merciful like David had asked him to? Or was he going to do justice, which I think he desired to do? Well, I'm sure he did, because that's what he ended up doing. And I can't really blame him too much for his choice, because when he's looking at Absalom hanging from the tree there, he's looking at a guy that had murdered his brother. When his father forgave him, he immediately rebelled against his father, a guy who had just recently violated 10 women, and a guy who on this very day was trying to kill his dad. And from Joel's perspective, he burnt my barley field as well. So that's another strike against him. But take the barley field away. You've got those 4 things. According to the law of Moses, murder, treason, abusing women, trying to kill your father, they all deserve the death penalty. 13 times Absalom should have died, according to the law of Moses. But I couldn't blame Joab if he had decided the other way. If he had decided mercy, well, that's what his king, his friend, had asked him to do. So I wouldn't have blamed him if he had chosen mercy either. Now, I'm not trying to go down the path of which one should he have chosen. My point here is he had to make a choice. He couldn't have chosen both mercy and justice. It was one or the other. If he chose mercy, then Absalom literally gets away with murder. If he chooses justice, which he did, then there's no opportunity for mercy. And I think it's this inability, it seems at least, for mercy and justice to coexist at the same time towards a sinner that Satan was relying on all along. You see, Satan wanted some of the honor and the glory and the praise that God was receiving. But in order to do that, he had to show that God wasn't glorious. Because the glory of God is wound up in who he is. He declared to Moses in the desert there, I am righteous, I am just, I am loving, I am merciful. But if Satan can show that he's not those things, if he is diminished in any of those, then Satan was right all along. God wasn't worthy of all praise, honor, and glory. And so when Satan was participated in the fall of man, he thinks he's got God in a bind now. Because how is God going to react to Adam and Eve, to mankind? You know, if they have rebelled against the king, they've rebelled against their father, they're just like Absalom in that respect. So is God going to be just? If God is going to be just towards humanity, humanity should be destroyed. The wages of sin is death. But if he does that, then there's no mercy. God isn't merciful. And on the other hand, if God is merciful and he relents from destroying humanity, then where's the justice in that? How is God going to resolve this supposed bind? And the answer is simply this. He sends one greater than David. Why do I put it that way? Well, when you look at David at the end of this story, he loved Absalom. That's obvious. But despite how much he loved Absalom, at the end, all he could say is, I wish I could have died in your place. But the one whom God sent, Jesus Christ, God in human flesh, he cries out this. He cries out, Simon, I will die in your place. Jesus dies the rebel's death. He dies just as Absalom died. Absalom hung from a tree. Jesus on the cross, he hangs from a tree. Absalom is pierced 3 times. Jesus on the cross is pierced 3 times, nail through each hand and a nail through the feet. Jesus is dying the rebel's death in the place of the rebel. In Galatians 3:13, Paul says this. He says, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For as it is written, cursed is anyone hanged on a tree. Jesus is taking the curse, that is the penalty for sin that we deserve. He is taking that upon himself in our place. We can think of it a different way. Like Joab, when he looks at Absalom, he's considering this list of sins that Absalom has done. He's a murderer, he's a traitor, he has abused women, he wants to kill his dad. Absalom's got this long list, all of it deserving death. But Absalom's not the only one with a list. We've all got a list, right? We're not perfect. We've got our list of things that stand against us, a debt that needs to be paid for these sins. But what Paul says in Colossians 2:14, and I'm paraphrasing here, what he says is that list of things that stood against us, that was nailed to the cross. In other words, Jesus was taking those sins upon himself, and when he was nailed to the cross, those sins were nailed to the cross. And when Jesus said, it is finished, he is saying the debt owed is paid in full. And so it turns out that what Satan thought was going to be his great victory over God, proving once and for all that God is not all that he is cracked up to be. Instead, now the cross of Christ puts God's full glory on display. We see that God is just. Sin is punished. He doesn't just ignore it. But we also see that God is merciful because it's not us, the sinners, on the cross being punished. It is God himself, the one whom we sinned against, who takes our place on the cross there and dies for our sins. So, church, our life could have turned out a tragedy. We could have been like Absalom, but instead our lives, thanks to Christ, are a testament to one thing. And we sang about it and we heard it in the prayer. We are lives that testify that God is indeed good. I invite you to pray with me. To him who is able to keep you from falling and present you before his glorious presence without fault and with great joy. To the only God, our Saviour, through Jesus Christ, be glory, majesty, dominion and authority throughout all ages, now and forevermore. Amen.